Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our new book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com.
The book's been out now for what? To the day, 3 weeks.
That's a true statement.
Yes.
It's exciting to think that we're actually published and authored and done. We actually wrote a book and got it out into the universe, and we're so excited to hear what you all have to say. But today we're going to talk about cool technology to help privacy and security programs.
Cool. Are you going to introduce our guest?
It's true. I'm going to introduce our guest. So today we have Dimitri Sirota, who is an entrepreneur, investor, mentor, strategist, and the co-founder and CEO at one of the first enterprise privacy management companies, BigID. BigID is a data intelligence platform that helps manage data governance challenges, allowing organizations to get more value from regulated, sensitive, and personal data across their landscape proactively. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Jody. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for having me. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Huge accomplishment. It's been a fun October. October's the best month ever. It's fall. It's cool leaves.
It's the Libra month of my birthday.
Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Cybersecurity Awareness Month, of course. It was National Dessert Day, my birthday month. I mean, October's the best month
National
ever.
Daughter's Day, too.
That might have been so far at the beginning of the month.
It was daughters and sons. They both happen in October. So there you go.
There you go. See, best month ever. But let's dive on it.
So, Dimitri, we love to start off and ask you, how did your career evolve to founding BigID? And I'd actually like to know how you came up with the name, because that's really catchy.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll start with the first part first. So I've been in kind of the security world since I basically started working. So I originally did graduate work in physics, and then after I left, I worked for about 2-3 years in what was then kind of an emerging technology industry, kind of around 97, 98, 99. I only started working in 97. I graduated in 96. And by 99, I decided I want to take the plunge and start a company. So I actually started my first company, eTunnels, in the network security space, helping these new emergent telcos that were kind of a big deal in 1999, 2000, for those in your audience that go back that far. And, back then they were introducing new high-speed internet to replace dial-up, and they needed services like firewall services, VPN services to connect the offices and so forth. And so me and a couple of friends made the plunge. So that was my first company. We raised money, had an office in Seattle and Vancouver. Did reasonable okay. It lasted a while, but we hit kind of 2000, 2001. And so I kind of veered away while they continued. And then I started my second company, Layer 7 Technologies, which focused security for APIs, long before anybody knew how to spell API. And that was, I think, 2003, 2004. We had some cool years and some hot years, and eventually exited that business in 2013. And I made my way from Canada to New York I worked for a couple of years at the company that bought my company, in kind of a corp dev role, helping them kind of acquire companies in security, and met my co-founder, who's now in Tel Aviv. And we started thinking about the problem of how does data privacy, how does changes in the regulatory environment affect data security? And so that became the genesis of BigID. And in 2016, we went off and started BigID, my third security company.
So companies, what we always say here, the phrase "know your data," and when we talk about the idea behind BigID, and you take this proactive approach to really being able to help companies identify the sensitive data, the regulated data, and use it appropriately. How does BigID help companies solve for that? Can you share a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, sure. So kind of Justin asked about kind of the name origin, and kind of the big idea of BigID, if you will, was the fact that if you're going to be doing data privacy or data security or even data governance for that matter, it all really starts with the data. And I think when we were kind of coming into the landscape, there were already kind of tooling for privacy management. There were ideas of doing it, but they typically started in different places, like for instance, maybe with a survey or a questionnaire. So there was always this proxy for knowing the data, right? You would rely on data recollections instead of actual data records. And having been in security the majority of kind of my adult life, we felt that for you to have truly kind of this notion of data protection, data integrity, you got to start with the data. That was kind of the big idea of BigID. And Justin, by the way, we were also able to buy the domain, and it was nice and easy and catchy, and you had lots of things you could associate it with, like big ideas and so forth. So, but that truly is that there was a kind of a changing of the guard in the data world, right? Partly because of cloud and the move to the cloud, partly because of these new regulations over the horizon, like GDPR, and that the old school ways, whether it's in privacy and governance or security, of understanding your data, of knowing your data, were not going to be adequate or satisfactory for being able to satisfy these kind of emergent problems. And so that is how we got started. We felt that you needed different kinds of technology to be able to sift through the volumes of data, the kind of the volume, the velocity, the variety of data you get in the cloud, and that the old school technologies that kind of suited enterprises maybe in the 2000s were not going to be suitable in the 2020s, if you will. And so we kind of went off and started building in Israel and New York technology that would basically be able to address the broader array of challenges, both privacy, security, regulatory around data. But again, the origin of it, the big idea was that we started with the data. We didn't rely on recollections, memories that are error prone. We started with the data. That was the big idea.
So you found the company in 2016 and you're a serial entrepreneur. So can you share with us a little bit about how building this company, may have required some pivots based on market or customer need? Can you, share some ideas as to how BigID has pivoted and evolved?
Yeah, sure. So when we started, I think it's always important. This is the thing you learn having started a couple of companies and invested in a bunch of others as well, is you need to find a swim lane, right? Something that is clearly identifiable, a problem that people already understand that they have, and that's something you could potentially own, right? You could basically define a swim lane. It doesn't have to be super broad. It just has to be something. And, when when GDPR was just kind of not yet enacted, but kind of over the horizon, one of the fundamental challenges on the data side around privacy was how do you identify data that belongs to a particular individual, right? So historically, if you go back to the 2000s, data discovery or know your data tools were very focused on finding certain types of data, and typically in a data environment that existed in 2003, 2004. So the technology kind of was kind of sprung from requirements like PCI. We got to find credit cards, and then from there, social security numbers, and you got to look in Exchange, and you got to look in NetApp, the things that existed in the 2000s. So obviously, some of those things still exist, but those are the predominant data landscape. Fast forward to 2016, 2017, when we were starting BigID, the requirements were a little bit different. GDPR required you to be able to locate and identify all the data, all the identity data belonging to an individual, right? So, Dimitri, what data does a company have on me? And then be able to look everywhere, right? Maybe not just in a file server, maybe not just in a SQL database, maybe not just in a email server, but everywhere, because the regulators that were defining these regulations don't know what HDFS is or what a Snowflake is or what a Databricks is. They just said you need to be able to locate this data. So that requirement led to BigID, because we thought there was an opportunity to rethink or reimagine how organizations know their data based on identity, right? The ID and BigID. And that had never been done before, right? You never really thought about, I got to find credit cards, but you never thought about, I got to find all the data belonging to a person. But GDPR and later CCPA and other privacy regulations said, no. Every individual has a right to access or delete or correct their data. And therefore, you need to be able to locate all the data. It could be clickstream data, could be passwords, could be IP addresses, cookies. And so we developed using kind of graph technology, which is a type of ML, something that we eventually patented in the US and Europe, new kind of technology to be able to kind of look across a vast data state, primarily in the cloud, maybe with a bit of hybrid cloud in the legacy data center, and locate all the kind of fragments of information that belong to an individual like Dimitri, and do it at very, very large scale, and maybe do like hundreds, if not thousands of these a day, without kind of burdening the system. So that was completely new. And that was the swim lane we kind of defined, this kind of identity graph to solve for this data transparency problem that was inherent in privacy. And that's where we got our start.
So on this notion of finding all the data and utilizing it, so here's all of Jody's data to comply with XYZ privacy law, there's also a benefit for a company to be able to know, here is all of Jody's information. Obviously, without sharing any particular client names, but is there maybe a story where you can share how a company has utilized knowing all of the data in a positive way, how it's helped that organization better know their customer or utilize it from a positive value perspective?
Yeah, so knowing the data has a couple of elements. So again, starting with personal data, right? So that's where we kind of began. That was the swim lane, because it was a very, very hard problem. It was kind of this notion that organizations were no longer going to be hoarders or owners of the data; they're going to be custodians of the data. So you need to be able to locate the data and provide that transparency to the consumer. So one benefit is obviously the ability to do that without weighing down an organization. As you can imagine, looking for the data everywhere takes a lot of resources, especially if you think about just the variety of places where data can be kept. And some of it is documents and emails. There's no way a human could wade through a lot of that. So one benefit is that organizations were going to be able to deliver transparency back to their customers at scale. And their customers could be anywhere in the world, because the technology we built was language agnostic. So it'd work equally in Japan as it does in the US. So that's one benefit. But there are other benefits, right? If you find data in places where you didn't expect it, maybe data that belongs to a German resident or citizen that resides in, maybe Turkey or some other place outside of the EU or the US, maybe you don't want it there. Maybe you want to remediate it, like delete it. Maybe you want to be able to move it. So there are other benefits in terms of how organizations go about kind of securing and dealing with the integrity of personal data by being able to know more about what data you have, where it resides, and how it's collected. So the way we built our technology doesn't just provide that transparency, like kind of self-service where we can locate all the data. It tells you other things about the residency of the user, what data resides in other kind of territories. And it could help in other areas, right? It could help in things like master data management. How do you create kind of a single record around that user? How do you make sure you don't have redundant or unnecessary data? So you keep your data to a minimum, which is part of the kind of privacy by design ethos that was kind of introduced by GDPR. So there was a myriad of benefits beyond just the regulatory mandate around transparency, around access and deletion to consumers, that allowed organizations to essentially be better custodians of that data. And of course, from there, we kind of layered on more and more, more, not just privacy data, but also security data, governance data as well.
Super fascinating. We really appreciate you sharing those examples. I think it's important for companies to understand how tools can be used, not just for a check the box compliance activity, but above and beyond.
So now I think we'll head to the cloud.
Your head is sometimes in the glass.
Well, especially when you're talking to me. But having said that, obviously, data migration to the cloud is one of the overall macro trends in business. And unfortunately, data breaches and security concerns have followed their way to the cloud with Kaseya, among others. And would like to understand better from your perspective how BigID can help companies understand and minimize their cloud data risk.
Sure. So BigID kind of from the onset was always kind of a cloud first company. We were built in the cloud native architecture and technology. We did support companies that had, because we catered to large enterprises. So we supported companies that had kind of a mix of cloud and data center. But from the onset, we kind of view cloud as where most organizations are headed, if not 100%, majority percent. So couple things about the cloud that kind of make it challenging. So one thing is you can no longer hide behind this kind of false sense of security of padlocks in your physical data center in New Jersey, right? Data is more exposed. It's visible. It's more fluid. It could be in a variety of locations, whether it's in AWS, Azure, GCP, SaaS applications, code repositories. So data, frankly, is more naked when it comes to the cloud. And on top of that, there are more associated risks with the cloud, right? Whether they're, who's accessing the data or who has access to the data, whether it's around kind of data replication and duplication, whether it's understanding what data is encrypted or not tokenized or tokenized. So there's more kind of inherent risks in terms of how the data is shared, how the data is used, what kind of data. So data in the cloud represents kind of a number of challenges. And so, a lot of our customers, I would say the majority of our prospects today are leading with cloud. And again, they're looking at technologies to help them understand what do they have, right? That situational awareness around what data do I have? Is it regulated data? Is it intellectual property data? Is it personal data? And then what is the associated risk around that data? And that risk could be based on the sensitivity of the data, right? Is it top secret? Is it secret? Is it GDPR? The risk could be basically, is the data kind of in the wrong place, right? Did it cross a border? There's a lot of data sovereignty regulations right now. There's data residency requirements in many cases. There's data access requirements in terms of insider threats and credentials. And so understanding kind of the what data you have and the associated risk becomes the founding kind of principle of how companies like BigID help organizations in the cloud by letting them kind of mitigate that risk, right? Once you know the risk, once you know the data, and then also being able to layer on more controls, whether they're access, third-party sharing, to, again, provide a more complete umbrella around security for data in the cloud.
I'm going to ask you to wear your crystal ball. Or not wear your crystal ball. Find your crystal ball. Wear your I meant hat. I meant hat. I meant like wear a hat with your crystal ball. But I obviously decided that there's just a new concept.
Why don't you ask him to put on his Nostradamus costume? That would be Halloween.
Yeah, I'm going to go as a crystal ball. How about
there you go. So people are always asking, where do we see privacy going in the next 3 to 5 years? So in your point of view, where do you think, and I'm going to ask you a 2-part question. One, any insight, your opinion on the regulation side, but also where you think companies are from a maturity perspective and where they are evolving with their programs.
Yeah, so I can talk about the maturity and then I'll talk about kind of where I think it's going. So look, I think most companies have something, right? And it's not like they didn't have anything for the last kind of 10 years. They typically have a process, whether it's kind of built on spreadsheets or built on some type of programmatic activity. More recently, I would say over the last kind of 4 or 5 years in privacy specifically, they bought some type of GRC tooling. Now, again, the GRC tooling may not extend back into the data. It might provide this kind of proxy for the data based on questionnaires or surveys, but there was at least this kind of replacement of spreadsheets with some other types of product. And I think now we're going in to a third phase where people are realizing the primacy of the data and the importance of the data. And so they're looking for end-to-end automation that begins with an understanding of the data and then extends to whether it's privacy reporting for PIAs or TIAs or ROPA, or this idea of kind of self-service preference management, data access management, et cetera. So I do think that right now we're kind of in this third phase where organizations, some are looking at end-to-end automation and beginning with the data. And that I think is a good lead into kind of one of the bigger trends we're seeing is that more and more organizations, whether it's in privacy alone, or whether it's in combination of privacy and data governance, or privacy and compliance, or privacy and even security, as you guys kind of are represented on this podcast, people are realizing that that data is at the center, right? And contrary to what the world may have looked like kind of 5, 7, 8 years ago, your privacy data is just one kind of data you have. It's a lens into your data around people data. Security is a lens into your risk data. Governance is a lens into your metadata. But at the end of the day, data is at the center, and it's the same data. And data has two kind of aspects to it. It's kind of Janus face in the sense that it's got a risk aspect to it. It's got a value. Most organizations, the things that most CEOs care about, they should care about both, but a lot of CEOs care about how do I get more money from my data, right? How do I extract value, right? How do I empower my data scientists? How do I empower my marketers? But you want to do that while at the same time preserving privacy, right? Because that's regulated, and reducing risk, right? Whether it's exfiltration risk, whether it's misuse risk, misaccess risk, whatever, insider threat risk. And so I think most organizations today are kind of tasked, and this is kind of the trend we're seeing, is that you no longer see silos of privacy, and then you could kind of go with them and they don't care about security. Or conversely, you don't just see data governance. More and more organizations see data more holistically. They see data as having value. They see data as having risk. And they want to be able to understand the totality. Now, you may still have organizationally windows into that data, right? Privacy professionals care about reporting to the DPAs and regulators. They care about kind of preference management and self-service to the consumers. Security professionals may care about a few other things in terms of vulnerability and risk mitigation. But again, they're no longer detached as completely separate silos. They're operating on the same subject, which is the data that, again, increasingly kind of powers the digital enterprise. And so that is one trend, is that just like on this podcast where the two of you are collaborating from slightly different angles around security and privacy, increasingly you see security and privacy, data governance in the same room, talking about what they want to get out of data, but also how do you reduce the risk around that data simultaneously.
I agree. We can all be friends. We all need to work together. Why are you laughing at me?
I'm thinking about putting that crystal ball in my head with the fish rolling around.
I think you should. That'd be great.
Okay.
Don't take my Halloween costume.
I think you and I should go as Nostradamus.
There you go. I've helped you out.
Okay. So, Dimitri, what is your best personal privacy tip you'd offer friends at a cocktail party on Miami Beach?
I don't know if I'd be doing a lot of privacy conversations at a cocktail party at Miami Beach, but I'll do my best to share it. So look, I think it's kind of the mantra that I've been kind of sharing from the get-go, right? I think in this day and age, just like spreadsheets are kind of antiquated to do any kind of privacy program, I think relying on recollections of data is also represents risk, right? I lose my car keys, I lose my sunglasses all the time. And I'm sure some of the people at the cocktail party on Miami Beach have lost their sunglasses as well. And if people can't reliably recall where they put their sunglasses, they're not going to recall where they put their data. So I think the kind of mantra at BigID is always about start with the data, right? The data represents kind of the value and the risk. That's where you need to begin if you truly want to have an impactful way to make a difference around privacy programs, security programs, data governance programs.
So when you are not building a privacy software company, what do you like to do for fun?
You know what? So look, now that I live in Miami, which my wife insisted on us moving to last year, and I travel most weeks, I actually like to decompress, sometimes with a cocktail party at Miami Beach. But I also like to read. I was at the beach one day, I was at the pool the other day, this past weekend. And, one of the great joys, maybe as you get a bit older, is the opportunity to read. You don't have to do it for marks anymore. And yeah, you get, I have 365 days of great weather. And so I would probably say my favorite hobby outside of cocktail parties at the beach is reading at the beach.
Well, maybe we have a book to add to your stack.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll go to Amazon right after this.
There we go. Now, where would the best place be for people to learn more and connect with you?
So look, BigID is always a great place. So bigid.com is a terrific place to learn more about us. And I think there's even a way for you to connect to me. We also have a new offering called Small ID, which is this kind of on-demand version of BigID that's simplified for companies that want to start smaller before they go big. So whether it's smallid.com or bigid.com, they're both great places to begin their kind of privacy, security, cloud journey.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the insight that you shared, and we know a lot of companies will gain tremendous value from it.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.